welcome. Thanks for joining. The topic today is big wave analytics, and by big wave I mean this is more than just an amateur presentation about Wave. If you're new to Wave, I urge you to stay. You'll probably learn some things, but there'll be a few slides where we might stretch you a little bit. In particular, we're going to look at bringing external data into Wave from internet sources and some secret gems that are available in the platform to make that happen. My name is Jean-Paul Antona. It's easier for everybody. I go by JP, and I work for Salesforce. I'm in the technology and products cloud. My focus in particular is analytics of the software engineering process. So I analyze our test failure rates, our code submissions by developer in order to understand how we can optimize our development engineering process so that we can deliver features and functions at scale. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to look at the options that are available to get data into Wave, but I'm going to focus your attention on some hidden gems that you may not realize are available there. And then we're going to look at an outline of what the data flow looks like, getting data into Wave from external sources. And then we're going to go into some detail on the HealthData gov in particular, bringing healthcare data into Wave. And then as well as FitBit, we'll look at bringing device data into the Wave platform so you can have competitions between members that are on your platform if you so desire. And throughout that presentation, we're going to peek under the hood. We might get our hands a little greasy and actually look at some lines of code, but nothing too strenuous. And then we'll cap it off with a discussion about best practices. So when you are trying to import data into Wave, this is the screen that you see. These are the options that you have. And as you can see, there's a lot of commercial adapters available for that, and every release there are more and more, making it easier to get external data into Wave. But you may not realize that there's some hidden gems here that I want to point out. And the first one is the CSV option. Now, we tend to think CSV file, I'm going to manually take an Excel file or a CSV file and upload that into Wave. And we'd think, well, that can't be too efficient or a good way to get data into Wave. But in fact, what we'll see is that there is a lot of power here in terms of using scripting tools like Python or Java or Node.js to produce a CSV file and then use the dataset utils tool to then upload that on a refresh schedule. So there's a lot of power hidden in this option that may not be apparent at first sight. The other option is Salesforce itself. So we tend to think that Salesforce is just going to give us access to our accounts, our opportunities, and our customer data that we have in Salesforce. But if we think about it in terms of Salesforce as a platform where we have all the capabilities of Apex to pull content in using the web services layer and then populate our custom objects that way, then we see that there's actually a lot of capability right out of the box in terms of bringing data from external sources into the platform and then populating that into Wave. And we'll look at that with some detail. So the two data flows that we're going to look at today, the first one I want to talk about is HealthData gov. And the other one we're going to look at is bringing in data from FitBit. So we start with HealthData gov. And if you're not familiar with this data, you should go to this site and check this out. There is a wealth of public data available about our health services nationwide, county, state, city level. And as you see, there's a lot available, but it's all depersonalized. So there's no patient identifiable information. So this is a HIPAA-free zone. So there's no concern there in terms of bringing that data in. Now, the idea in this approach is that within our corporate network, we're going to initiate a process. And that could be whatever your tool of choice is, whether it's Java, Python, Node.js. I have all of those examples. And you could do that in a context like Rundeck or any kind of scheduler that might wake up on a daily basis, interrogate the HealthData.gov website, and pull down data. Okay? And you're going to be surprised how easy that is. And we're going to look at a very simplified example. It's a point-to-point integration Later, when we talk about best practices, we'll talk about using like a data pipeline, like a Kafka type of tool. But in terms of introducing the topic, we're just going to look at some very simple point-to-point examples. So then we bring that data into our own corporate data lake, where we have the opportunity to integrate it, maybe with your own proprietary data. If you're mixing patient information that you have internally about clients with this data, you'll see there's a lot of opportunities to gain insight from that. And you would do that in your data lake. And then the next step would be to use the dataset utils jar, which is a tool that's publicly available, to then import that into Wave securely, right? So you can get it into the Salesforce cloud securely encrypted and then blend it. So that's a second opportunity to blend the data with whatever else you have in Salesforce or in Wave to get even more joins and more insights. And then once it's in Wave, obviously, then it's available on all your devices, and you can provide that insight to your field service and everybody else in your organization. The other data flow that we're going to talk about is the FitBit data flow. And in this case, what we have is an individual within your organization or customer that actually initiates the consent with FitBit to say, I'm going to allow this application, this Salesforce instance, to pull data from my FitBit account. Okay, so it'll be initiated by me, and we'll see that example. And then we're going to use Apex tools. These are Apex web service calls to then draw that data into Salesforce and populate custom objects. And then from there, obviously, it's standard Wave functionality to bring it into Wave where we can blend it and then present that information out to our customers. Okay? So those are the two routes that we're going to look at. Let's drill in on the HealthData.gov data set first. So if you haven't been to this website, again, I urge you to check it out. There is a wealth of public information available to anybody and everybody who wants to consume this data. And there's a precedent for this. If you're familiar with in the 80s under the Reagan administration and then later under the Clinton administration, they made the GPS data from our satellites available to the private industry. And now we have industries like Uber, Garmin that use this data, and these are billion-dollar industries that derived all that innovation from the public wealth of the government making data available. So that's the precedent that we have, and that's 30 years of innovation. And the HealthData.gov has just started up in the last 5 years last few years that they've started making this data available to people in this room to begin to build applications and to blend the data with your own proprietary information to yield insights and solutions that can benefit everybody. So 30 years from now, what billion-dollar industries will have evolved out of making this data available will be very interesting to see. And the goal of this initiative is, in fact, to do just that, is to provide this data so that we can innovate and use it in that way. Now, the data set is huge. I could probably spend half a day talking about all the data that's available. And as you can see in this screenshot of their website, they do a pretty good job of indicating there we go. The formats that the data is available in. So CSV is a very common format, as you can see, and JSON, right? So if you've been in Silicon Valley for more than 3 years, you realize how prevalent JSON is as a data source. So they're making it very easy to pull this stuff into your Mongo database, your Elastic database, your Couch database, and then work with it from there. So I have to say they've done a very good job of understanding their audience and where innovation is happening with the different types of formats that they're making this data available in. And they have XML and text as well. And the type of data that's available is hierarchical in terms of you have state data from each of the different states are contributing data. But you have federal data as well from Medicaid and Medicare. They're supplying a lot of their data. Pharmaceutical, the FDA is providing data, about the components that are available in drugs. So there's it's just amazing what's available out there. And then even down to the county and city level. So there's data at every health information data at a variety of levels that are available. And I'm just showing you maybe 2% of that. Some of the data sets don't come in a downloadable form. You actually have to interact with an API. This one would be an example of that. That's providing like hazardous material information and in terms of location. And you'll find that a lot of this data is location specific. So they're giving you the data in the context of zip codes, counties, and states and such, so that you can really begin to get insights about your customers, your clients. When you're thinking about a consumer customer, if that's the level of client you have, Dun & Bradstreet, data.com isn't going to provide you a lot of insight about that. So in order to get insight about your customer at a consumer level, it's going to help for you to have, what environmental risk factors, what environmental pressures do they have that are on the top of their mind every day? So do they live in a population where there are abnormally high cancer rates? Do they live in a population where there's a high percentage of high school dropouts or unemployed? So all of that data is available in these data sets. And in particular, the data set that I use the most and that I am very fond of, that has provided a wealth of information, is the community health status indicators data. And I think I'll have you convinced in a few minutes that there is a wealth of information in this data set that you can start to understand the context, the environmental pressures that your clients face in terms of the risks that they have, in terms of whether they have sufficient facilities in their county for emergency services and that type of stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity to see where there are opportunities, markets, to invest in and to develop facilities for patients and such as well. So we're going to look at this data set in particular. The only thing I want to point out with this slide is one of the, anybody that deals with data knows a lot of times you don't get the benefit of knowing, getting a data dictionary, basically. And they've done a very good job of giving a data dictionary for everything that's in this data set, so that you know whether the numbers are percentages versus, raw integers and that type of stuff, and what each column means in their data set. So there's no challenge and ambiguity in terms of interpreting the data set. So in looking at digesting this data, the key inflection point here is grabbing the data off of their website. And you can do that manually. Sometimes that's what I do. But obviously, if you want to have a recurring cycle of pulling data down, as it becomes available on HealthData.gov, then we can think of in terms of a Node.js or a Python or a Java script within your corporate environment that, maybe it's in Rundeck or Informatica or Jenkins, wakes up on a schedule, interrogates the website, and pulls down data. Sounds complex, but it can be as easy as this. So this is, a few lines of Java code using open source APIs, apache.org, HTTP connectors. And the point is, it takes in a URL, takes in the URL of the data set that you want to connect to. It checks to make sure it's getting a valid header, that it's a 200 error code, that it's not hitting a null website. And then once it confirms that, then it just pulls the data into a string. And anybody who's familiar with Java or Python or Node knows from that you can populate a CSV file or push that into your data lake. So it's not rocket science. If you did this in Python or shell script, it would be a curl command, and you could probably do it in less lines of code. So this is not tough if you're somewhat familiar with writing code in most languages. So then once we have it in our data lake, the next part is to get it into Wave, right? So what you're going to see here is Salesforce has made this very easy. They've provided the Analytics Cloud toolset, which is basically a jar file. And basically, this allows you to bring data that you have in a CSV format right into Wave securely, and as you're going to see a sample of in a minute, very easily. So this tool set is available on a GitHub website. So this is public information that Salesforce has made available. This is public wealth. So you can go out to this GitHub website, pull down the jar file, and then in order to execute and use this jar file, it's just a simple matter of I'm passing in a couple parameters here. I'm passing in my Salesforce username, my Salesforce password, and then the name of the CSV file, right? The path and the name of the CSV file that I've populated this data into. And then the operation, is this going to be overwrite? Am I going to append or going to upsert? And then basically the rest of the stuff that looks complex is just really one line of code, which is a Java command, which you can simplify by using your environment variables correctly, but I've sort of elongated it here. So I'm calling Java, and I'm supplying it with the dataset utils jar, okay? That's this little piece right here. So I'm saying I want to run this jar, and I'm feeding it these parameters that I've sucked in, which is my username, my password, the name of the data set, which in this case is going to match the name of the CSV file, and then we're going to overwrite, and then the HTTPS URL to my Salesforce instance. So it's easier than you would think. If you're familiar with Python, you can do this in a shell script context. You can call this from Python. I've done it from Node.js as well. But it basically comes down to, at most, 2 or 3 lines of code. And then, what do you get? So what does that look like? So what can we do with that data? So we're going to take a look at that data set. So this is the Community Health Status Indicators data set that I brought in to Wave. And you see that, first we're going to look at some demographics. So it's telling me basically the first dimension that I've selected is population size. So we get a geographic chart of the areas that in dark blue that have a high population versus areas in lighter color that are low population. So this would match our expectations in terms of California and Los Angeles County having large populations. But if we want to look at in terms of population density, and then we look at that, we see, well, all right, so the Eastern Seaboard, New York City, these areas are more dense in population. So far, the data set is meeting our expectations about what our intuition about what we should be expecting. So that's a good sign. We're just gonna, we just want to double check that the data is meaningful and it's proper. But you can see there's a whole host of things in this data set. Percentage of the population 19 and under may surprise you actually. So it turns out that Alaska and Utah have the highest percentage of people under the age of, young populations. So, and when I select on Utah, then I get a blend here of the clients, my clients that are in that state. So I can understand that in terms of environmental pressure, they're surrounded, they may not actually fit that demographic, but in terms of environmental pressure, they're surrounded in general, by people younger than the average population. I can see San Juan County in particular seems to have the highest rate of people, and I have one client that's in that county, and so they may be young or they may be surrounded by people that are younger. So that would tell me the kind of messaging that they may be susceptible to in terms of a marketing campaign, etc. Now, that's a kind of a trivial example. Well, that was fun. Wouldn't be a demo if we didn't. All right, there we go. So let's just, for fun, let's go look at percentage of population. So there's ethnicity in here. There's a lot of good stuff. Percentage population 85 and older. And let me unselect the selections I made. So we see that there's a lot of people in North Dakota where there are a lot of people 85 and older. And in particular, Hooker County seems to be one. And I can see that I have clients in that county. So that client may be either taking care of an elderly person or an elderly person themselves. And so I start to understand some of the marketing messages that I could deliver to that client that would be meaningful to them. Now, let's get into some of the more interesting data here. So now we have leading causes of death, all right? Not to scare anybody, but again, a lot of information here in terms of death that occurs during pregnancy complications, due to birth defects, due to injuries. So, and by age group and by ethnicity, all right? So I'll just pick one here. We have death due to injury at a very young age, and nothing too surprising there. Let's look at maybe a different ethnicity. Okay, it seems to be following what we know in terms of the geographic trends of ethnicity, so nothing too surprising. Let's go a little bit further down. We have death by homicide in certain age groups, and by ethnicity, suicide, cancer. So you start to get a sense of the level of granularity you have in terms of understanding the risk factors that your clients that live in these areas down to the county level may face. Now, cancer is a big topic that we want to develop a lot of solutions for, and we can look that at a very young age, these are the states and counties where people are susceptible to cancer. So now let's find another one that may be interesting here. How about an older population? All right, so in different parts. So I can, again, see by clicking on the state, I can see which of my clients might fit that demographic, and then down to the county level. Now, the next one that I want to show you is, okay, so this one is in terms of vulnerable populations and environmental health. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in this data set. So by default, we're looking at a dimension of the percentage of the population that has no high school diploma. So see, California's pretty high there. And then apparently, if you look at unemployed, it seems to follow the same spectrum. So there is apparently a correlation between populations where there's no high school diploma and the unemployed, unfortunately. Now let's look at portions of the population that have severe work disabled. You might be surprised, as I was, that Florida apparently has a pretty high percentage of that. And I can drill into Florida. I can see that I have clients in that demographic, and in particular that Miami-Dade is an outlier in terms of having people with a severe work disabled. And when I click on that, I see that I do have a client that's in that demographic, and therefore I could change my messaging towards that client based on that. So there's a lot of stuff here in terms of toxic chemicals that are in the environment down to the county level. I mean, even for your own family, it might be interesting to know some of this stuff. So this is the volume of toxic chemicals that are released. And I guess, Nevada's pretty high on that list. And so I can click on that and see that I have clients in that region. And actually, as well as Alaska, which is surprising. So there's some counterintuitive insights that we can gain from this data set. But again, and then apply it and blend it with our client data to understand and get a 360 view of the types of environmental pressures that our clients have. All of this for free at no cost. So that's the one example of the HealthData gov data set. Let's move on to the next example that we have. So the next one is FitBit. And so in this data flow, the key is that I'm going to initiate as myself. I'm going to go to FitBit and authenticate and give consent to the Salesforce application to bring my data in. And then you'll see then we populate a custom object, and we can blend that with other objects in order to do like team challenges and that kind of stuff. So this one's kind of fun. And we're going to use Apex web services that are available for free. And so the way the FitBit works is, like Salesforce, they're very concerned about security. So they have a very structured way of interacting with their system, and then the Salesforce system, which happens to be the same system because FitBit uses Salesforce. But anyway, so what happens here is the first part of this interaction is, as a FitBit application, I go out and I register my application. I get an ID and a secret code. Okay, so I am supplying that right here. I've put that into a string. I got my client ID and my FitBit client secret. And then I make a URL call. Okay, this is in the context of Apex page here. Okay, so this is all Visualforce programming, and it's a JavaScript. So I'm going to make no, it's Apex. It's Visualforce. So this is a class. So here's the actual Visualforce page, and then the Apex class supporting that page. As you can see, the controller here is FitBit Connect, and then that's the name of my Apex class, is FitBit Connect. So I'm going to do a URL to out to FitBit, and I'm going to pass in those parameters of which application this is, and where FitBit is going to send me after they've authenticated the user and the user has made the consent. Okay, so maybe 10 lines of code there. So then the user authenticates, and it Fitbit redirects back to Salesforce. So that's what this page is. Now this is an Apex page, and we see this is JavaScript. So it's basically, this is the page that comes back, and it takes in the parameters, which is an authorization code that Fitbit gave us. All right, so now we're authorized to interact with the Fitbit API. And that's essentially what we do here is we're going to call a Apex method on our Fitbit redirect class that's called insert metrics. Okay, so all this did was consume the parameters that Fitbit gave us and then called an Apex method. It's that simple. And then here's the method itself. So insert metrics. So it takes in the access code, and then it gets today's date, and then it calls a sub function, which basically formulates a URL to Fitbit to get the activity summary for this user, the user that made the authentication, and then basically sends that request, gets the data back as JSON, parses it through, and then starts doing inserts into our Fitbit custom object. Okay, so this is my custom object right here. I create a new instance of that object, and I just start populating its fields, and then I do an insert on that. This is all SQL, right? So that's it. We've used out-of-the-box Apex functionality. And what does that look like? So let's actually do a demonstration of that. Let's walk through that. So we'll go out. Now, in my instance, in my sandbox here, one of my tabs I have is a FitForce tab. So I go to that tab, and it will open up my application. And right now, what it's already done is it's already gone out to Fitbit, done the authorization because it has my credentials saved, and then pulled in today's data, and then populated my Wave dashboard. So there's a lot that happened under the scenes that wasn't apparent because of cookies, and it's saving my information. So we're going to go incognito here and do this so you can actually see the mechanics at work. So I'm going to log into my sandbox. All right, and for some reason, I was doing this earlier, it just kind of cycles here, so we're gonna hack it just a little bit to get to our page because something's broken there, but we'll get right by it. So we're gonna Apex Fitbit connect. So we're hitting an Apex page. And what does it do? It's asking me for my Fitbit credentials. So here I am. I'm actually at fitbit.com. So I'm going to give it my Fitbit account. And I've authenticated with Fitbit. And there it goes. It's passed the authorization token back to Salesforce and retrieved the data. And now I'm presented with my step count for yesterday. So the replication between Salesforce objects and Wave happens on a nightly basis. So I'm not going to get anything sooner than yesterday's data in this case. But that's okay. That's still pretty relevant. And in these charts, you can see that I'm comparing my steps yesterday. I did a lot of stepping because I was at the U2 concert having dancing fun. And nobody on my team or in my cloud was doing any steps. I guess they haven't synced their devices yet. But I can see summaries for this week and this month by steps, by calories, and even my daily activity. So now I can see that the blue line here is my step goal, 13,000 steps a day. And there are definitely days where I exceed that. And a few days during the weekend when I relax, and then my calorie count as well. And then I can see in terms of my activity summary, now I happen to be the only person on my team, so the individual and team metric here is going to be the same, but compared to the people in my cloud, we'll see a difference. So we can see that 11% of my daily activity is very active. I'm a marathon runner, so I'm running at least once a day. Relative to my cloud, which is 6%, versus my 11%. So there's some insight here about, relative to my teammates and my department, how active I'm being. And then we can, we're using Fitbit data from all these different individuals who've consented to bring this data into Salesforce. And the way that I've bifurcated the data sets is that it is impossible for me to see somebody else's calorie step counts. And I'm using Wave security predicates to ensure that I only see my data. And then I can see other people's data at the aggregate level of teams and departments. That's the only way I can see other people's data. But you can see we have a lot of fun with this. Once we get the FitBit data into Wave, we can see what the daily contribution is by team and cloud and et cetera. So 2 examples there of bringing external data into the Wave platform. And with my last bit of time here, I've got about a few minutes, it looks like, or a few seconds, really. So what are some of the best practices? What are the conclusions? Well, obviously, Wave is not just for Salesforce data. And in fact, by bringing in some of the data from the outside, we get a broader context of insight about our clients, especially if your clients are consumers. You can't use data.com, you can't use Dun & Bradstreet to gain a broader context about them. So the HealthData gov data sets becomes very valuable in terms of understanding the environmental pressures that your consumer customers may have. We can blend data at least 3 layers. You saw me do it in my data lake, and then we can do it in the Wave data flow option, and then we can do it in the SACL layer, which I presented, but I didn't really go into detail. So some of the joins that we did was in the dashboard level. And that, the CSV option we tend to think is just for manual imports, but it's a lot more than that. By combining it with scripting options, we can do a lot more. So I'll just summarize by saying there's a lot of options for getting data into Salesforce. You have your commercial adapters, but there's some real hidden gems in terms of using the dataset utils that Salesforce provides and the Apex options as well. So if you have any questions, I went over time, so I'll have to take them on the side. I appreciate your patience, and thanks for joining us today.